que su bolsillo jugando vas a mendigarle oro a la suerte tonta que no entiende a la razón sobre la mesa. Ya no hay dolor sobre la mesa. Va tu reloj. Una vez más, jugando contra un lustroso y blindado espejo que te vio perder. Creyó a tus manos sudorosas, no al calor de tu licor. Fulo pareja, te animarás. Sos el idiota que quiere más. No tienes más, no tienes nada salvo tieso tus vanos ojos y transpiras. Y no ha importado tabaco que le calme a tu timor. La nueva droga, las apuestas, la nueva boda que quiere más.
yo otra vez. No, por favor, siéntense. Antes muerto que vencido. Antes muerto. Antes muerto que vencido. Antes muerto que vencido. Antes muerto que vencido.
Antes muerto que...
¿Qué?
¿Que vencido?
Sí, vencido. Vencido.
¿Ma qué te pasa? ¿No lo sentís? ¿No tenés sangre? ¡Vibra! ¡Vibra! ¡Antes muerto que vencido! ¡Antes muerto que vencido! ¡Antes muerto que vencido!
Welcome back to Vectorworks 2013. This is Design 2A series, episode 5A, Rendering and Textures with James Russell. And you're probably wondering what the hell's going on, why wasn't the intro at the start? That's because I like to surprise you all with this. So, I'm currently drawing the Friends household, Monica's apartment, from the Friends series. This is a sketch from Inaki that I've used as a base plan. I'm going to put a description to his Facebook site in the links below. And I've extrapolated that, brought the walls out, the doors, the windows, and you can see I've just started on a table with a place setting there, because I like to have a few items before I start this episode out. Today we're going to focus on textures, rendering, how do you create your own, maybe putting some image props in, and particularly how do I approach things like walls with multi-surfaces, doors, windows, etc. So we're going to have a look at all of that, go through some things, and I'm just going to quickly open up an example to show you firstly how we get our textures happening, and then we're going to come back and look at how I might approach putting textures onto something like this, a large project. Wow, and in no time at all we're here. I've just quickly whipped this up. I've got a sphere, a cone, rectangular prism and a cylinder placed inside this room in 3D with two walls and a slabbed floor, which are kind of all the objects that I think we'll need to use for now. just have a play with that. I've just coloured each of these by clicking on them and changing their colours here in the attributes panel just from the picker. So that's kind of as far as we've got, but some of you might be asking, how do you get to this rendered mode? You haven't actually talked about this yet, and that's fine because we're saving it for this point right now. From your view menu, and it's the same in all of your workplaces have this view menu, you go down here to the rendering tab. Okay, and there's two different options here. You've got the Renderworks style, which I believe is new to 2013 when they picked up the 4D render package. Up until any other version, you probably just got this rendering tab here, which is what I'm used to so far. You can see at the moment I'm on final quality Renderworks, but we're going to cover these from the start and work our way through. So wireframe is where you've lived from the start. Wireframe is what you've adapted to any time that you're drawing in your plan view. It looks really bare bone and simple, as you can see here. It's the fastest drawing style because it is the most basic to Vectorworks, represents everything as a plain model, no textures at all. Pen colors are included in a basic form as well. From the view menu again, going down to rendering, you've got the wireframe options, which is, it's really simple. It's just like colors and pen thicknesses and things like that, and each of these have their own options. There's only two that I'll actually discuss the options for, which are OpenGL and your custom Renderworks or artistic Renderworks. Sketch mode is much like wireframe, it just gives it a little bit more of a roughness to it. You can adapt some sketch styles, as you'll see over here, and we will talk about styles in a moment. But for now, we're just going to move ahead. So, back down to our rendering menu here, and once you get adapted to these, there's a couple of shortcuts that you'll know, particularly Control-Shift-G, which is the next mode we're going to talk about, OpenGL. Now, OpenGL is the only rendering mode that allows you to move during rendering processes. I'm just going to quickly save this view, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But you can grab your 3D flyover tool here from, it's the third icon across, 3D flyover, and once you've adapted a point, I think we've talked about this before, you can rotate around that point whilst rendering at the same time. It does have basic shadow support, it will do surface rendering to an extent, and textures as well, but it won't do advanced textures, and I don't think it does mapping to surfaces. I'll have to check that. But as you can see here, I can fully move around these objects in 3D, no worries, and jumping between views as well. So I'm going to jump back here to my saved view that I've made. We're going to talk about those in a moment when we talk about taking snapshots. So jumping back down here from the view menu, rendering, and I'm just going to open the OpenGL options here to show you can increase the detail, you can use textures, you can edges, shadows, all of that. So just have a play with those tick boxes there if you are requiring something for a presentation mode using OpenGL. Now, that there is the cutoff point down to here where the basic package of Vectorworks stops. So normally in basic Vectorworks you'll have your wireframe. I don't know if you have Sketch, I'm pretty sure you do. You'll have OpenGL, and then it'll jump over this section here. You'll get to your hidden line and dashed line, I believe, and then your polygon shadings down the bottom. This section in the middle, though, comes with the Renderworks package. So that's the new 4D Renderworks package that's included with 2013 if you want it to be. In 2011 and I think 2012 you're still using the old one, which is my preference, strangely enough, but we're going to go ahead with this one here. So Fast Renderworks, it's kind of a nicer looking version of the OpenGL, and then you can step it up another space right here to go to the final quality mode, which makes everything look very slick. You will have shadows if you have lighting incorporated, but you can just have a look, for example, on this sphere, how nice the edges are, how smooth it is. You can see as I zoom in it has to increase the quality for the DPI of my page, but you can just see it's got some really nice effects happening on there. The cone not so much, but the reasoning for that is the way that this is currently drawn and the amount of divisions that it's got going on there. So I'm going to zoom back out again as my computer thinks about doing that. There we go, back out here to my saved view. Moving straight back down the line, and once again you have got the custom Renderworks, which is kind of a step up or a step down from final quality Renderworks. I'm not going to enable it now, but you can just have a look at the options for it. Same as the OpenGL options, you've got a fair few options up here as to do I have shadows, do I have blurriness, textures, etc. And then you've also got a whole heap of quality settings depending on what environment you're using. Do you want enhanced shadows? Do you want your environmental lighting? and particularly with glass here, maximum amount of refractions. Or is that, oh no, it's reflections. There you go. So that's when you're analysing a glass object, which we're going to get to. I've got one prepared in my other drawing for this. It's how many times does the light bounce around inside that object. If you increase that, it's going to take a longer time to render, but obviously you'll get a more accurate and closer to real life picture. So it's up to you there on that one. Going back down here from the view menu, and I'm going to jump to the artistic Renderworks. Probably every designer's favourite version of the rendering options. I'm going to choose the options for artistic Renderworks first, just to give you an overview. Now, some of these have changed since I last used it in 2012, but most of them are the same. What you've got here from this drop-down menu and a little preview above, similar to what I've got going on here, in fact. So you start off with this pencil style soft, and as I go down, I think it'll auto-update. You can see as I'm going through, it's just got different sketching styles of your drawing. So there's some thick and thin pens. You can just have a play with these in your own time. Crayon, I believe, is a coloured option. Chunking lines. What else we got here? Clone lines, brushing watercolours, for example. And these artistic Renderworks options mainly affect your pen styling and the edges of objects. There are a few, for example, that affect the actual surface and textures as well. I think Cartoon incorporates textures and makes them look slightly different. So we're going to try out, let's start off with Cartoon. That looks pretty good. Just as a couple of examples, obviously you can play with these in your own time. It'll take a moment to re-render once I've selected that from the rendering menu up here. So, no, sorry, not custom. On to the next one, Artistic Renderworks. Here we go. Now what you can see here is that it's actually converted my drawing into its interpretation of a cartoon, which is, it's kind of nice, you know, pale colours, no shading, the walls have been simplified, it's dropped a few lines where it thought was necessary, and it actually looks really good. So when you start to develop your skills in Vectorworks, you'll know when it's appropriate to use these and when it's not. So for example, for some of the technical drawings that I do, I just use some of the pencil soft and the pen thick and thin to really represent my objects as though they've been freehand drawn. And when you print it out on A4 page, people can sometimes even sit there and go, did you actually draw this, or is it, you know, printed out? And you'll notice things like it enhances the end lines of stuff, as if you've drawn slight overshoot or extension lines on bits and pieces. The lines are slightly wobbly, all that kind of stuff going on. And inside these options here for these various styles, you'll get a variance of change as well. So for example, a thickness and an edge color here. There's also a few that have more variation than that. So here's the pen thick and thin. You can see once again, it's as though I've sketched it with a pen. It's actually adapting here. It's got thick and thin pen styles going on. Hasn't fully rendered because I accidentally stopped that, but that's okay. And you do get the idea, hopefully, from that where you can head. I recommend that once you've mastered your Vectorworks skills up until this point, you've got something that's presentable, and you want to present it in a different way than standard. Have a look at the Artistic Renderworks options in there. Hidden line and dashed line. Now these are probably my most commonly used, in particular when I'm doing detailed drawings of set items, for example, cutaways of different pieces of set that I really want to show the framework or the details behind. So hidden line, and you'll notice I'll click it here. It's very straightforward. It will simply show the lines of anything that's at the forward of the image that you'd normally see, and it won't show the back lines. So for example, this box here we know has a line that runs down here, and we know it has two extension lines that run out this way. If I click on it, you'll see those hidden away there. So hidden line basically sketches it in a style that just simply represents the wireframe view without the background drawing technique going on. So just as an example, this is the standard hidden view here, and this is the wireframe, so it's just hiding all of this excess stuff hidden behind. Now there is another one here, and this is another one of my favorites, which is the dashed hidden line options. And what this does is it applies the same hidden line technique to everything that's shown in front of you, but on a better shown scale than this. All of the other lines have dashes through them. You can see it here as I zoom out. This is more evident when you actually take this across into a viewport, as you meant to do, and then put it onto a sheet layer. So that's what that is for, and we'll try and do an example of that later on when I do a cutaway into my friend's household. Jumping back down here to the rendering menu, and we've got the shaded options now for polygons. So we've got unshaded polygon, shaded no lines polygon, and final shaded polygon, and they're all very straightforward. Their title kind of tells you what they are. So unshaded polygon renders these in 3D, but doesn't give any shading to the polygon, just shows them as they are straight out with their mapping. So you can see here it's given this a planar mapping on top of here. with the surface represented as a polygon map. Moving straight ahead, if I'm just going to jump through these really quickly. Shaded polygon will take this a step further, keeps that same mapping, but gives it a slight shading to it, as if there was some sort of omni light directed upon this. So you can see it wraps around and goes to a slightly darker section here. As you would guess from the rendering menu again, shaded polygon no lines, takes away those lines that it was representative of, just gives it out as a polygon map with the shading options present. And then rendering again, final shaded polygon is just a step up from there. Gives it the enhancement with lines, slightly ups the textures and the rendering capabilities on that, but we're still seeing it as a polygon breakdown. The difference to this over some of the other rendering modes is it will be quicker because it is rendering it as polygons, a simpler form of each of these objects, but you won't get the smoothness, so it's something you have to toss up between. You know, it's a personal choice really in how you want to represent your objects. Down the bottom, you've got batch render jobs and starting your renders. We'll get into this particularly when you talk about doing multiple different styles and doing big batch jobs with your final quality Renderworks, and it's where this saved view option comes into play. So up here from this little tiny box up here, it's got saved views. It's got a drop down menu, and normally it'll just have these two, save view and edit view, and then it'll have your views listed underneath. I've got untitled view, which is probably a mistake by me. What I'm going to do here is change this up a bit though. I'm going to go to rendering and make this final quality Renderworks. There we go, and I'm going to rotate this to a top downish kind of view in an isometric mode still. And I'm going to show you the save view. So I like this view, that's a great view. Click save view. You get some options here, so I'm going to call this top down isometric. You get some options here. So do you want to save the orientation, the zoom, the page location, the unified view, which means do you want all layers to be unified in the same location, or do you want them split out separately? Your render mode and options. Now in this case I'm going to tick this box, which means that when I come back to this view I want it to render out in the style that I currently have selected. Do you want to save the visibility? Most probably you do. You can alter the layer options. And do you want to save the class visibility? Which basically means, do you want everything that you're seeing now to be the same? If you've got all these checkboxes done, then it's going to be the same when I come back to it. So I'm going to hit OK on that. I'm also going to rotate back down to here, like a slightly underneath view, and I'm going to change the rendering style. So I might make this rendering style here our artistic Renderworks, which I think is still, there we go, sketch style of some variety. I'm going to also save that view, so I'm going to save that as lower isometric, and I'm going to put in brackets sketch. There we go, and I'm going to save all these things again. Now what this allows you to do is if you move around your drawing, you go, oh yeah, I need to have a look at that from a different view. Yep, that was really good. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, I really like the perspective I had and I can't get back to it. All you do is drop this down here, and I go, okay, I want my lower ISO sketch, and it takes you back here. Takes you back to seeing that as you wanted it to be, and then you can drop this down again. I think that top down view is really good, and there it is again. So it's a really good way if you've got a client in front of you and you go, now these are some examples of what you might see, you know, around the set. This is what you might see inside your building. This is the view from the bathroom, this is the view from the kitchen, this is the view from etc, etc, and set up a whole heap of these things. And obviously you can not only get them there, but you can print them out in the view up here. So from my rendering menu here, I'm going to go down and create batch render job. Now what this does, and it's really for if you're doing high resolution images that are going to take you, I don't know, a couple of hours to render out, for example. You know, some people get up to that stage. For example, the Shrek movies, this is a little bit of trivia for you, but the Shrek movies actually took 2.5 years to render. They literally sat back and went, cool guys, see you in 2.5 years, just let this computer do its job, you know. So when you get up to these stages, I've had high resolution images that I've done that take 15-20 minutes just to render a single final quality view. So what you do instead is you go to a view, and I'm going to do it here, for example, in wireframe. And once again, this could be a whole series of views that you've got from your saved views here. I'm going to go to this one here, and you go, okay, right, I want this rendered out, rendering, create batch render job. And it goes here, what do you want to call this? I've already got one saved, but I'm going to call this ISO. -01. Super. And I ask you what the render mode is, and you go, well, I'd like it to be either a Renderworks style of all these different styles, which we haven't got to yet, but we will. And you've also got your final quality, your custom Renderworks, and your artistic Renderworks. So I go, okay, I'd like final quality Renderworks, please. Go sets the export image options, because it's eventually going to become an image. You say, I want all visible objects, or I want the current view, or, you know, so I want current view, for example, what I'm seeing right now. The memory required for this is greater than 500 meg because it's quite an advanced thing. Do you want to proceed? Yes. Is that because it's such a large file? Wow, that's massive. That is massive. I'm going to swap that down. Let's do a 1920. Go do 19. Oh, close enough to 1080. Whatever. So I'm going to click save on that one, and then I'm going to hit OK. It gives me a message saying that I've been 15 minutes or more doing this, so that's fine. So what you do then, when you want to start your render, is you go down to rendering, you go start batch render job, which I've misclicked then, and you've got your available jobs sitting here. So it's like keeping a queue in mind, and you can go, I want to choose all of these, all the chosen jobs. You choose a folder to put it in, so it can put it under my name if it wants to, or I can choose a different folder, and you click start. And what it will do is then it will just think about it. It'll just do it in the background. While it's working away, you can go check your email, go make a coffee, go have a snooze for a couple of hours, and come back, and all of your particular jobs that you've chosen to be done will be finished. So that's what that's for, and once again the easiest thing to do is just jump around in your saved views there, go create batch, create batch, create batch. Once you've got a whole series of stills that you're happy with, you set it to go overnight, come back in the morning and surprise, you've got all your drawings done. So that's the rendering stuff going on there. We have got the Renderworks styles, and they're very much just like these rendering options here, except styles come with a slightly different tint to them. For example, they're mainly artistic. You have got realistic down here as well, which you get into once you put a skyline in, and once you've done your lighting options. Once you've put all your textures on, you can do all of these. So I'm just going to have a go here. I haven't particularly played with these much, but the artistic shadow blue, that sounds pretty interesting. That's very pretty. Look at that. That's excellent. And we've also got, where are we? Yeah, we'll try one of the OzCAD ones, which come with my Australian version, I believe. If OzCAD want to correct me on that, I don't think they're international, but we'll try Sun Study with grey shadows. Completely obliterates my object because it's not sealed inside. I presume if you were doing an interior drawing, that would be slightly more interesting. And we'll just try one more here from the lower realistic side. We'll try an interior fast on that. And there we go, it's having a go at doing that. You can see that's the new 4D render engine going there, and that's what we've ended up with there. I'm not sure why my walls are white. It looks like it's done a physical sky interior background on that, so it's because it's not sealed on an interior, it's taken most of the blue that's surrounding this object. As you can see, I've got a sky rendering in the background there, and it's putting that onto our objects. But we'll get into a lot more of that later on when we have a look at our apartment. So, where do we move from here? Very good question. Jumping back into a wireframe so that my entire drawing isn't taken up in rendering power. And we're going to talk about textures. So, from over here in my resource browser, if you don't have it open yet from the windows up here, you can choose palettes and you can choose resource browser. Click that, you've got a checkbox, and you'll have this little thing. Sometimes it sits collapsed. I don't know if I can make it collapse. There it is. And then you can just click this little pin, it'll pop back out and stay in place. We have got quite a few things that have popped into here as we've been doing our different render styles, just in case we want to drop them on, but I don't want to. What I want to do is right click in this and go new resource in, Untitled 2, which is my current document name, great name for this document, and you'll see there's a couple options here. I want a Renderworks texture. So, notably here, this is the point, if you don't have Renderworks, you kind of have to stop, because you can't do any more than this. You can play with your colours, you can do your sketch options, you can have a play with that. Don't stop watching the episode, obviously, it's quite interesting from here on in, but most of your rendering capabilities won't be there, just throwing that out there. So, Renderworks texture, click on this, and here we go. We've got a couple of options. We've got a texture name, we've got some shader options, so they come in 4 categories: colour, reflectivity, transparency, and bump. Let's run through what each of those mean. So name, what am I going to call this? I'm going to call this test 01. Sounds like a great name to me. So colour. Colour is the base modifier. Colour is basically what does it look like underneath everything else. If you strip it back to its bare bones, what does it look like? And you've got some options under here. You can take an image. Now, image means I'm going to take something, I'm going to tessellate it. This is good for wood floorings, it's good for tiles, it's good for if you want to map a wallpaper to a wall. That's what you want to do. Something that looks like something in the physical real world that you're going to map to this thing. And that's what probably, at a guess, 50% of most of your textures are going to be. The other common options, and that's normally if you're going to do a high resolution, of course, you're going to take mostly real world images. The other options down here, we've got a color and a Fresnel option. Color is basically a straight out color. You select that, and I'm going to do it now for you. You hit edit, it gives you an option. How bright is the color and what's the color from? It's the same color picker that you get from your attributes panel. So you'll have any color that you've used so far in your document. You'll also have the color wheel. You'll have the color palette from over here with all your different tones and stuff like that you can choose from. Your Dulux colors if you're doing walls, you've got your Laminex and your Pantones depending on what you're painting with, etc, etc. All your scenic paints as well for those of you in the theatre world are listed here. So if you want to make it accurate, just choose one of those. Pretty easy. And those of you in the lighting world, there's your Lee and Roscoe colors. What else? You got color picker, you've got your custom palette manager if you want to do that, and your standard colors down the bottom. So you can choose one of those. I'll choose this red that we've used before, and there we go. You can see it's applied this to here, our little display options. So jumping back down in here, we've got 4 other options, and these 4 options are consistent with the rest of these. They used to be a lot more. I think in 2011 and 2012, when we weren't using the 4D render engine, we did have a few more of these. It might have transitioned in 2012, I can't remember. But you've got bricks, noise, pavement, and tiles. Each of these has their own options. So if I click bricks here, you'll notice that my little sample here changes. It's got a little brick texture to it. And underneath each of these, they've got modifiers. So clicking edit, you can see I get a whole heap of things. Scale of the bricks. How big is it in comparison to the standard tile? I'm not sure what the standard tile is. I might have to find out about that. Our two-tone brick colors. So you can see if I wanted red bricks, for example, throw this in here. We've changed the tint entirely. You've got the contrast between those two colors. So we've got a 25%, which I think means 75% dominance to our first color, and then 25% to our secondary color. 50-50, I believe, if I type that in there, should make that a more even ratio. Yeah, probably. The brick widths, so how wide are each of the bricks heights, you know, the shifting variance in between them, so 50% offset, as you can see here, means that we're going to end up with 2 bricks and then 1 brick, 2 brick, 1 brick. If I put that off to say 33%, we should end up with a third, a third, a third, a third, a third, a third. And you can put in half brick rows if you like with the shifting on those. Gap colors, pretty self-explanatory, and the alternating bricks, if you want to have the color for alternating bricks, you can do that as well. So I'm going to click OK on that. You see some slight changes there, so my offset by third is happening now, and that looks pretty cool. Doesn't exactly look like bricks, but we'll discuss how you would make that look like bricks a little bit later on. Jumping through these, because these 4 are evident later on, we've got noise, which is basically just a kind of fading transitional of random scattered colours, I guess. And you've got some different patterns to your noise. You've got turbulence here and a whole heap of other ones that I hadn't seen yet. Let's just try out a few of these. So I'm going to try out wood noise. Okay, that looks pretty cool. It's as if you cut a tree in half. You've got marble noise. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. And a whole heap of other things. If you ever played like Photoshop or anything like that, you'll just be like, oh, this is just the texture library. Cool. Anyway, back on our standard noise, variance between colours, some scaling options, relative mapping in 3 directions there, and dimensionality, 2D and 3D solid. Choose whether it's wrapped like a pattern or a 3D solid. Interesting. And some different options here that I've never played with, but you can go and have a play with those if you like. Pavement, once again, here we go. Excuse me. If you're doing an outside exterior view of some sort, you're probably going to need pavement tiling at some point in time. It is a random pattern scaling there. You've got the stone colour, the gap colour, and the smudge colour, which I believe is the smudge across some of these. Hit OK on that. And we've got tiling as well, which is a more symmetrical pattern, much like the brickwork. It's normally 2 or 3 tone. You've got some different patterns here. So we've got brick patterning, we've got circular patterning, radial lines, for example, if you want to trip out and have a dance party. We've got some spiraling. Everything else is here. So there's a lot of different patterns here. Weaving, for example, if you want to do any kind of weave patterns on a wall, or if you want to create a very, very basic wallpaper, you could probably do it here if you tried hard enough with some tessellating objects. You can see we've got some different colours here. You can randomise the colours if you want to, which is probably a variance, I would say, between your 3 colours, using those as a boundary. And then you've got some grouting options, which is basically this area around any of your patterns, some beveling and some scaling. So it's all pretty straightforward there. Hit OK. Yeah, looks kind of cool. Jumping down though, we've got reflectivity options, and I'm just going to choose a base color for this next little section, and we might come back and have a look at something else. So I'll go back to my red here. Reflectivity is how much light bounces off something. Okay, so there's kind of a few different levels. You've got your basic flat wall that absorbs most of your color, which is kind of like your black hole for any light. You've got your next level up, which is kind of your plastics, I guess. Plastics jump in and out, but the very basic plastic level won't have much reflection, but it will be reflective. And then you've got your metals and, of course, your mirror all the way up the top. So having a look at that, you can have an image reflectivity, which means it only reflects in certain parts of an image map that you go through. We'll probably talk about that more in transparency later on. You've got backlit, which means it's actually producing its own light, so it's actually shining, and you have got a percentage, I think, a brightness level, reflection and blurriness. So how much of the images that come out, so if you've got a mirrored surface, for example, your reflection value would probably be close to 100%. And then depending on how good a quality your mirror is, the blurriness would be how well that image is translated back at you. So at the moment, you can see the luminosity, the brightness is at 100%, it renders out at 100% no matter. So if this was a very dark scene, it would be actually producing its own light to 100%. No reflection means it's not bouncing any light back at us, and there's no blurriness of that light that's being bounced back. Keep going down though, you'll get to glass, which you can see it's gone slightly opaque there. It has got a blurriness value of 0, which means this is probably perfect glass, and a slight tint color if you want to have those things going on there. Note though that that's not actually transparency of glass, it's just reflectivity of glass. You've also got a glow, which means it's producing more than its initial brightness factor. So it's emitting light here, and you can do some reflectivity and blurriness options on there, as opposed to backlit, which just means it gets to 100%. Glow actually means it can exceed its standard brightness level. Metallic options, as I said, you can see it's got quite a tint to it there. It has a metallic tint to the reflectivity value. I presume that would increase as it gets brighter. The pattern is metallic here, but you've also got brushed and turned, depending on what kind of metal you're trying to represent. In here, we've currently got a default reflection value of 50%, which means 50% of the light that hits this will come back, but it will have a 15% blur factor on that, so it's going to look slightly blurred. And then down here we've got a mirror option, which is, it's going to take our color value away. I don't think it actually represents a color value at all when it's in a mirror mode. You have got a color tint to that particular shader. As I said before, 100% reflection rate and a blurriness value of 0. So depending on how well the mirror is made, it's going to either reflect perfectly or it's going to have a slight tint of blur to it. And I'm going to choose plastic for this option here in particular. You can choose these options here, once again, brick, noise, pavement and tiles, and that will apply the reflectivity value of your chosen level with the added modifiers in that pattern. So if you, for example, how can we do this? If you had a piece of perspex and you had shaded that, or you had sanded that away in a brick styling so that some bricks were more opaque than others, you could do that using the brick modifier here. You can see it's applying that over the top. So we've got reflectivity in different areas there, and I believe it's represented here by the colors black and white, much like an image map would be. So that's your variance there. You can see the images that are black here, which is the red parts, are less reflective than the white parts, and you've got a blurriness factor over the top there. That's the added column that's been thrown in the top there. That's the best way to represent that in my opinion. I'm going to throw that back just to a plastic reflection value, and I'm going to go to transparency. So transparency, you've got a lot of different options here. We've got image and image masking. Now I'm not actually sure what the difference would be here. I think an image mask must be on a grayscale variance, and then the image must be on a different variance value, but I'm going to have to have a look at that. We will talk about that more though. I'm not going to touch image masking now. We're going to talk about it when we do image props, which are more exciting later on. You have got some 4 different standard options here. We've got a color transparency, glass, plane, and rectangular mask. So color, I'm not exactly sure. It must be some sort of, adjustment due to color. I never use that. I always use glass or plane transparency options. So glass, here you go. You can see it's kept our slightly opaque red tint here. the transmission rate of 95%, which means that 95% of light passes through this, 5% is maintained within our glass. So the lower this rate is, or sorry, the higher this rate is, the more light can pass through it. If I put this at 50%, I would expect 50% of light to hit and refract internally inside this glass shader, and then 50% to pass through. And that should make this darker if I hit OK, I think. Yeah, there we go. So you can see 50% of our light is getting caught up inside our glass. So for example, if you had that sanded perspex, depending on the level of sanding, more light is going to get caught up inside that object and illuminate the object rather than passing through it. Index of refraction 1.5 here, so I'm just trying to think. It's the level of refractivity that happens inside the glass itself, and then the resulting ray that would come outside of that. So if you've created a prism of some sort, you're really going to see the effects of this refraction index happening, and that's just a density of the internal structure, I guess, of that glass. You've got a tint color, a blurriness, an absorption color, which means does it become a different color when it absorbs light into it, as opposed to just having a standard light ray through it, and the absorption distance, how far does it absorb that color into the object, which is really interesting. I've never played with that before. You've got plane, which is different to glass. It's just got basically an opacity modifier. It doesn't refract inside the object, it just limits some of the light that's coming through and passes it out the other side with no refractivity. So that means that you're going to speed up your render times, but you're not going to have it as accurate as real life. And lastly, we've got the rectangular mask, which I've never actually used because I find that image masking is far better, but I believe it just makes a rectangular repetition. If I choose single and single, it should just be a rectangle, and then everything else is transparent behind it. I've never found a use for it, to be quite honest. I just use image masking. Now this is once again where you can use your brick, noise, pavement and tiles. For example, if I put this brick modifier on, you can see the white areas of that brick are transparent, the black areas are solid. So it's really good. This is probably the most particular form that I might ever use these, is in transparency mapping. And it's when I'll do things like vines, weaving patterns, cloth patterns, some sort of speckle pattern. Sometimes you can use the noise modifier or the tiles option here on a weave mode. And if I make all of these white now, white, 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 even though it doesn't, it shows it there with the white to black gradient in the background and then the grout color in the middle there. If I hit OK, you'll see it ends up like this. What I've got there is the grout in red, which is our base color here, and the transparency weave in the middle. And you could obviously reverse that as well by making the grout color, grout color is white and then black as the color that you want to pick up, and you'll end up with a weave much like you would a cloth, and you could shrink that down to a smaller scale. There are easier ways to do that, I have to say, but that's a good starting point for anyone who's looking into transparency. I'm going to put that back to none, and I'm going to look at bump mapping now. So what is bump? Bump is something that was developed during the early rendering of movies, and it's essentially what bump textures are is if you have a flat surface, it will identify that as a flat surface when you're using it, when you're hovering around it in wireframe, when you're looking at it in basic views. The moment you go to do a full scale render, it does a thing called bumping, which is where it embosses a 3D texture into or out of the actual surface itself. That might make a lot of sense here, and it's only got a couple of options: image, which means you're doing an image bump, or the brick, noise, pavement and tiles options. I'm just going to click brick and show you what happens here. What you'll notice, and I hope you can see it, is that there's a brick formation that's actually looks like it's been embossed into the tile itself. And what it's actually doing in here, and I'll see if I can increase the strength here to 100%. There we go. If you have a look at this little brick shader here, it's actually using a black and white grayscale image, and the blacker an area is, the more indented it is into the tile itself. The wider the area, the further out it comes from it. So you can see there's various modifiers here, same as our brick stuff, but when I click OK, what you should notice is that this has quite a lot of detail here. And if we were to look at this tile side on, which I don't think I can do at the moment, but if you were to look at it side on, you'd actually see bits protruding out and bits going back inside. Now that's bump mapping for you, and once you add that together with the brick color here as well, if we were to have that on, say, a red brick, I don't think I've got the skills right now to do this, red brick with a black tile color and all that kind of stuff. If you put a basic reflectivity on that, no transparency, what you'll end up with is quite a detailed series of bump maps. What you can do with this also is use it in, for example, wood textures. If you're doing a wood flooring that's a floating floor, you've imported your texture in, which we're going to go through and do together. We're going to import a wood texture in and see how that looks. But if you've got a floating floor, there's always going to be a gap between each of your floating floor pieces. You could use a bump map, for example. Instead of having to draw every single one of those lines in between your wooden floorings, you could use your bump mapping on a black and white image bump that you've made to give the impression that those little lines in between each one are there, for that added bit of detail. And one day, perhaps, if you go into interior design, if you head down some sort of architectural route and you really need to do those high resolution images, you will need to have this kind of level of detail to give you that edge on your competition. There's a couple other options here. We've got the size. This is basically a real world sizing. I'm not sure what it is to the tile, and I will have to find that out, but basically the larger the size is here, if I type in 100, it's going to be a larger base setting for this. There is a scaling option which we'll look at. We've got an object type here for our preview, so I could put this on spherical and you could see some spherical options there. You can see our slight reflectivity of plastic highlighted there, and probably if I took this off back to an object attribute here, you'd see that bump mapping as well shown over that sphere there. There's a couple others. There's the cube as well, there it is there, and there's a flat object which is a base flat on, as if we were hard up against the surface itself. Couple of checkboxes and some indirect lighting options as well. Can it cast and receive shadows? Yes, yes, yes. And then you hit OK when you're happy. What it will do, and I'm going to click no on saving that, is it'll add it to this section here, rendered textures. And you can see I've got test 01 written here. So I'm going to apply this texture that we've just made, the testing one, to one of our drawings. I'm going to pop this into Final Quality Renderworks. I'm using the shortcut key there, Control Shift F for me. I think it's Apple Shift F for you guys on a Macintosh. And I'm going to apply this to our cube. So there's a couple of ways to do it. I'm going to use a click and drag for this one. Click and drag onto that object there. And you can see it's applied it to there. So it's kept our class object styling and it's put that on there. It's at a very small scale, I think. Am I zooming in far enough? Yes, I am. So either a very small scale or a very large scale. Let's have a look at that back out here in the real world as my computer loads that in. I'm going to go across to my render tab now. I have no object selected, but the moment that I have this cube selected, you can see it's given us some information. It says this is our texture that we've currently got selected, test 01. But working our way from the top, we've got our document sketching style, which is only relevant if you have a sketching style on. The part, which is overall. That means we're doing the overall of the object. There are a couple of other options here, which is the top, the bottom, and the sides. And you can see at the moment they're all taking their data from overall. So if you just want to apply texture, just apply it to the part of overall. Decals will come to when we get to wall and posters in a moment. We have our texture name here. We could obviously click on any one of these. For example, I'm going to try a glass clear green. And you can see it's got an amazing refractivity index going on there, showing us a few of the different objects from different sides. And then I'm going to flick back to our test 01. What you'll notice is the moment I've taken that texture there, the glass one, it's placed it into our texture library here within our document. So it's taken it out of the Vectorworks library and placed it into our library in case, hey, we liked it, we might like to go back to it. Mapping types I'm going to show you in a second with all of these, but there's 5 different modes now apparently. There's planar mode, which is basically in alignment to the plane, the ground plane. There's a spherical mode, which wraps around any spherical objects. A cylindrical mode, which is why I've got the cylinder here. And a perimeter mode, which basically chooses the perimeter of the objects and maps it out towards that. I'm going to leave it on perimeter as it's probably the best for this. And I'm just going to increase the scaling on this to see if our bricks actually get larger. There we go. So you can see I was down on 1 before, and as I suspected it was too small, but as I've increased this up to 24.8, which apparently is what it is now, you can see that brick texture is really coming out and showing us what it's got. There is an offset here, a horizontal and vertical offset, so if we'd like those bricks to align in any one particular direction, we can add to those. So I might try adding 10 here and seeing how that shifts and affects my document. You won't have seen much of a change there, but if you're doing this in OpenGL, I think it'll try and render our texture for us. No, not this time. It's only with textures of images that it seems to do that. But if you need a finite movement inside there, you can adjust the horizontal and the vertical offset in there, and the rotation as well. So if we wanted to throw this onto a 45-degree angle for some reason, we could do that, and you can see my bricks have changed slightly now. It's kind of nice. You've got a flip horizontal and flip vertical, mainly used for images, and of course the repeat horizontal and vertical will unlock once you've got images as well. There's a few other options here, radial stuff for mapping to circles and longest edge kind of deals going on. So, what does all this mean? I'm going to import a texture now onto all of our objects and have a look at how it maps differently. So, I'm going to select all 4 of our objects here, and I'm going to give them the same mapping. Let's choose something like, I want probably a wood of some variety. Okay, looks like we've got this wooden styling here. Okay, that's a really good one, I like that. So what can we see here? We've got a cherry wood glazing. And this is going to show us the different types of mapping that we've got here and how they're applicable in many different ways. I'm going to have to change the scaling on this back down to 1. Just remembered our defaults from before, and I'm going to throw that back to 0. There we go. Now, most of these shapes, when you first draw them, have a default mapping style. So if I click on the sphere here, you'll notice that it says the mapping type is spherical. And the cone is probably going to be the same, seeing as it's got a majority of spherical components to it. The box, I'm pretty sure, will be perimeter by default, and strangely enough, the cylinder, I think, is perimeter as well. So, where are we going to go from here? I'm going to just try and show you a couple of different variations on the mapping types and when you might try and use them. The spherical mapping for these is always going to be the best, the cone and the sphere. The only other type that I think you'd ever probably use is planar for these, maybe, but the issue with planar is the alignment of the actual texture itself. If I change this to planar, I think we'll end up with a line where there it is, the seam of the texture begins, and that's the starting point, the 0 marker, and it wraps the texture around there from then with a tile. The spherical mode actually just kind of combines and recreates the texture all the way around the sphere. That's why I think it's a little bit better for that. It's important though when you're doing spherical objects that your texture that you're using does actually tessellate correctly. Tessellate means that when you put the seam to seam, you can't actually see it. It always keeps going round and round and round. Not as important with the wooden flooring or anything like that, because hopefully you can just match that up where your joints are. The cone is much the same. You can still see our polygons showing through here from this cone. I think there is a way you can get rid of that by increasing the cone data, but for now I'm just going to leave that there. You could put a blur on it as well. The voxel, though, you'll find that mainly perimeter is the best for any type of geometry that involves straight polygons that meet at a corner. And by that I mean any kind of box that you've created, any shape that has jagged edges. The reasoning for that is that it won't give you that tessellation between these two if we wanted an object to wrap around as such. It's not the best for that, but it is the best for displaying this correctly. What you'll notice at the moment that I'm on perimeter mapping is that this side here looks correct. I'll try and click off that. This side here looks correct, and this side here has the same wood texture. To show you a variation on that, were I to use, say, planar mapping for this, it would choose the front plane here, and I think you can see it. This front plane here, it's chosen to put the joint at the 0 marker and map this area here correctly. It's given us the correct sizing. What you will notice though on this left hand side here and the top is that when this image here meets this edge, it instead tries to wrap it around in the best way that it can. What's the way it does that? It takes the last pixel of colour on this side and bleeds it all the way down the side. It does the same thing on the top, it would do the same thing on the bottom and that side, and on the other side, the reverse side, you would see this same image continued. So it would wrap this portion, bleed, around this way, bleed, and then back to here. So that's why perimeter mapping is the best for these, because you don't normally want them to continue. You can try and choose cylindrical as well, but I think you'll end up with two sides being the same. There you do. You end up with this side, the back side, and the other side being continuous, as if it's looping around, and the top and bottom just gets that bleed effect as well, where one side, depending on, I think it runs north to south or something like that, it'll just run across with the same colour across to the other side in a blend. So it depends on what you're doing there. Perimeter mapping I find is the best for any square objects. Now the cylinder, interestingly enough, has perimeter mapping on, and it turns out to be the best. It does the perimeter around here, does the top and the bottom. So what is cylindrical mapping for then, you might ask? Well, a cylindrical mapping, it does have a purpose, but I don't really know how to explain it. In this case, where you see the side, top and bottom of an object, perimeter mapping is probably the best. But if you're only seeing the external edges of a curved object, you might want to consider cylindrical. because it doesn't stretch as much. It tries to calculate and realign the texture towards the cylindrical surface, keeping it more consistent than other modes. But you will notice the top and bottom do bleed in the cylindrical form, and they normally spread out from a 0 marker. In this case, it seems to be this point here, and it's bleeding out in a radial style. So I'm going to leave that on perimeter there. It might be a little bit confusing. Just know that there are different mapping types, and if all of a sudden you load it and go, ugh, that looks really gross, you can go, maybe I should try a different mapping style. We're going to move away from that now, and we're going to go back and try some of our textures on our little house that we've created. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do image import, image props, and then I'm going to fully furnish my friend's house. So let's see how we go. Back in a sec. And we're back here in the friend's apartment. I've just turned off the walls. I put them on a separate class for that side just so I can see this a little bit better, but I do like having the other walls present. I'm also just going to turn on our slabs class because I do want to see the flooring in here. And in my layers here, I'm just going to turn off my background image. There we go. So now we can focus on this a little bit better. You can see I've got my slabs in. I'll do a quick OpenGL so you can see where I'm at with my drawing thus far. So I've got my doors in, I've got my big window up the back there, door over there, the kitchen which is not complete yet, and the other door. All very basic textures there, and you can see I've done my little rendering here. You can see I've made some nice little knives and forks, done some glasses. You would have noticed in that time lapse right at the start of this episode that I did put an interior to those glasses, and the reason I did that is because I want to fill them with some sort of liquid. Also got some plates and this table that I just took from our resource browser. I found that in the furniture residential section. If you're looking for that, go back and have a look when we started to use the resource browser. I think it was episode 4A, but I might be wrong. So, first things first, this table is probably the easiest thing. I did see back here in my furniture residential there were quite a lot of wood finishes. So each of these texture libraries, and I will show you a few more in a moment, have a lot of textures that normally go with most of the components they have. I'm just going to try a sample one of those. Let's try this dark wood here. Just clicking and dragging that onto our object here. It must be dropped on an applicable object. I see. Okay, does that actually already have a texture? I bet you it does. That's very sneaky. So I suspect... Oh no, I'm just on the wrong layer. It's okay. It's okay. Everyone calm down. Inside here, the rendering data for this, because it is a symbol, I would have to edit that symbol. Not a big issue. I'm going to right click and go edit 3D component. Inside here, it's broken down into several pieces. And it's on a class texture of... What class are you on? Class none. Awesome. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, there's two options for what I could do. I could either go into my classes, create a new classes table, which is probably the easiest thing, and change that, or I could select all of the objects, go to my rendering tab, and change them all that way. I'm going to select them all, group them, and then I'm going to apply the texture to the group. There we go. And now, while I'm still here, I'm under the edit symbol menu at the moment. I'm going to put that into a final quality and have a look. And there we go. Look at that. That's a lovely wooden table. Mapping isn't too bad on that. I think it's probably planar, but that's not a big issue. I'm going to be pretty happy with that. So I'm going to exit that, and there it is inside my object now. The mapping down here on the legs, as you can see, isn't quite correct, but I'm just going to live with it for now because at this zoom level you're not going to notice. But what I am focusing on is what I've got here in front of me. These plates, the silverware, and in particular the glasses that I've created. What I'm going to do first is grab a knife and a fork here, and I'm just going to have a look at them. And we're going to try and find a metallic that would suit those purposefully. I don't think there's going to be one here. Maybe this metal nickel plated. If I drop that onto there, we'll have a look. It's a bit too refractive, but it's actually quite a nice texture. Do we have options for this that I can edit? So once I've chosen one of these, and just to show you the library, there is actually a Vectorworks library of textures. So you don't have to be like, oh, I don't like any of the ones that are in the rendering options, they're all slightly lame. You can drop this down here, go to your Vectorworks libraries, drop down here. You can also locate it as I normally do by going here and going to browser document, finding it inside your program files or inside your applications if you're on a Mac. Clicking on Vectorworks libraries, it'll take you to here. This is inside my computer. And if you double click on the textures folder, you'll find there's a few textures inside here. I think I even get a few additional ones with my Oz texture pack, which you guys mightn't. But under my textures here, you can see there's a few here. I don't know what most of them are, but there's exterior finishes, there's interior finishes, metals, plastic, and glass, which I'm going to have a look in a second. Nature, which I presume is leaf tiling, a lot of grass textures that you might be using outside. Stone, brick, wood, and a lot of flooring here by a particular flooring company, I presume, called Forbo. I'm going to have a look in this metals, plastics, and glass. When I open that up and scroll down, I'll see a sample of most of these. If you're not seeing the pictures, by the way, I think you can right click and go view as thumbnails. If you're seeing this as a list, it's going to be a little bit boring. But you can see I've got a fair few things here. Glass with ripples in it, rose tinted glass, stained glass, that looks gorgeous. We've got some metals here, excuse me, cast aluminium, anodized, some brass polishes, bronze, so all these libraries are quite extensive, and I haven't looked through even a tenth of these, but I still find what I need to find just by looking at the titles. You can see there's some with a transparency there, there's a corroded mesh work, that's just amazing. So it's all about just finding what you might like inside here. I don't want any of these. I probably just want a silver plate of some sort, or a stainless steel. Let's just have a look at one of those on here. It's probably going to be the closest that we want. We could go for a larger reflectivity index if we wanted, and I think we can do that by left clicking on here, going across and going edit stainless steel resource. That's what you can do. You can also duplicate and edit, which means you'll get a new version of it if you're currently using it on something and don't want to change that, and you can change the color and the mirror shaders as well. So I'm not going to duplicate it. I'm actually going to edit the straight out resource, which is, it has been duplicated, you'll notice, into my document, which is the friends backup here that I'm using. It's been duplicated into here, so I can now edit that straight out. Having a look here, it's got a color value, which I'm presuming is going to be a dark gray of some variety. It's got a reflectivity of mirror, and you can see here what its reflectivity value. It's 50. That's okay. It's got a transparency value of none and a bump mapping of none. Now I'm just going to have a look here. I might give that a slightly higher reflectivity value, about 60%, but I suspect it's because we don't have much lighting in here that it's giving us that kind of value. You can see the reflectivity happening here, so I'm going to give that a go and put that on all of my objects. What I did want to look at though was my glasses here. I'm just going to do one so you can see the difference between these. I'm going to find a nice glass texture in here. I'm going to jump back into that lovely document that I had down here, textures, metals, plastics and glass, and find a glass that's appropriate to this. We will choose glass, lime and soda, but I'm just realizing this is a group over there in the top right hand corner, so I'm just going to quickly ungroup that. There we go, two components now. So I'm going to choose my glass, lime and soda here and apply that in. Have a look at that. It's quite transparent, I'm noticing. So instead I'm going to edit that now, edit the glass, lime and soda resource. Comes out like this, and it does look quite beautiful there by itself with no other objects on it. I'm just going to change the transparency value, bring that down to about 75, I think. 1.5 is the reflectivity for glass itself. And there's no absorption color here. I could set an index color coming through there as well. I think I might instead just change this to a slightly off grey, maybe in the direction of green perhaps. No, too much. Back away. It'll be fine. So there's our glass. I'm also going to do the interior component of this, which I haven't done anything to yet. I'll just see if there's a base color here that I like. That metal red's awesome. I'm going to... Oh, even that rusted metal. Now see, this is where you kind of mix things up a bit. You go, why are you using rusted metal? And I go, because the look of it. The look is what we're going for. Rusted metal there looks incredibly like some sort of liquid in this fashion here, particularly with that mapping style that it's got at the moment, which is perimeter mapping. I should probably change that just because of this sweep. As you can see, it all bleeds towards the center because of all these polygons that it's created. And that could be where you could try a spherical mapping or something like that. I could try a spherical here and see what happens. Wow, look at that. That really looks funky now. Yeah, so I'm going to leave that like that. That looks pretty good. Zoom out here and have a look. I'm not quite happy with the bleed around the sides, but that's from the plates in terms of refraction happening off that. We'll see, and I might have to turn that index down a bit. Okay, so I've started off those. I'll complete the rest of those when I can get through to the rest of this time lapse that I'm doing now. What I want to focus on is doing some wallpaper, some flooring additions, and maybe putting some decals in. So I'll be back in a sec. I'm just going to get that prepared. Okay, so I just quickly put in a rug that I'm going to do and a picture frame that I know doesn't exist there. I'm just going to use it for this example and then probably either move it or delete it. So we're going to try out 3 different things now. We're going to try out to do a rug texture on this rug that I've put here. We're going to try and do some laminate flooring on this slab down below, and we're going to try and do this picture frame that I've got sitting right here. So firstly, let's start with the slab. I'm going back to my building shell layer that I've got going on here. I'm going to just select this slab for starters, and I'm going to pop it into OpenGL so we have a look. That's the slab selection there, and I'm also going to put it into Fast Renderworks now, which I don't know the shortcut key for because there isn't one at the moment. But there's our Fast Renderworks. It's going to have a little think about that. It's going to have a little bit of rendering time because I've got that there. I might actually just turn off temporarily our furniture layer so we can just focus on the slab here. So how do we make a texture that involves an image? Well, firstly, right click in here and go New Resource in your current document, Renderworks Texture. From the color drop down, you want to choose Image. I'm going to import an image from File, seeing as I don't have one used at the moment in another resource. It's going to take me to my current file, which I've got open here, which has most of my images that I've used so far, and I'm going to choose this vinyl flooring, a horrible flooring, but it's actually pretty close to what I've seen in the Friends set images and all the other things that I've done so far. Now that looks pretty good from what I can see. There's no filtering on that. We are going to tile this horizontally and vertically. No flipping required. You can rotate and invert as well. Clicking OK gives us an example there. Now what you can see is it's got quite a thick black line around the outside there. That's probably due to how my image is currently laid out, but I think it's going to be okay for the moment. There's no other editorial options that I want to change here. We could put a blur over the top, but I'm actually just going to see how it looks for the time being. You can see here we've got texture 1. I should probably rename that. I might do that to floor texture 1. There we go, it's jumped up to the top, and I'm just going to simply drag that straight onto our floor here, and we'll see what happens. Now already I can tell you that's far too small. We could edit that in the render tab here, but I don't think we want to. We want to actually edit it here in the componentry size. I'm going to increase that to 100 and see what happens. Okay, it's closer, but it's nowhere near close enough. We're going to have to really amp this texture up, and this is the important reason that you want to make sure you have high quality images. Normally if I use a Google search or something like that to find these images, I'll make sure I check the large box in my search criteria so that I get a high quality image. Now surprisingly, that's actually really close to what I want to do. The sizing is pretty much perfect, I think. And that was quite straightforward to do. The flooring texture, as I said, because we're on a slab, we don't seem to get as many options as I thought we might. You can change the part to top overall, and no, that doesn't even give it to you there. So it's simply texture application, it seems, for slabs, which I hadn't used for this before. That's fine though, as long as you get your texture sizing right in the texture options here, you're pretty much set. So that was pretty straightforward. Let's have a look at some other options when I go to do my rug here. So swapping over here to the furniture, it'll try and render this in as well, I suspect. There we go. And we're focusing on this rug here. So I'm going to left click on the rug, grab it like that, and I'm going to once again create a texture. So right click in here, New Resource, Renderworks Texture. Dropping down again, we choose Image from here. I'm going to import yet another image, and this is a rug similar, not quite the same though as Monica's rug that she has there. Hers has flowers on it. I couldn't find one like that. What I do want to do though is not have this image tile, just purely for me to line this up. So there it is there. The sizing of this is going to have to be quite large. Once again, 1000 I would think is going to be close, but mightn't actually be big enough. Drag and drop that texture straight onto there, and we'll see what happens. There's the rug image. So what do I need to do first? I can already see that I need to rotate that 90 degrees to have it align. The second thing I'm going to do is scale this up. Now the scale factor is normally limited in here. It normally goes down to 0 and it'll tolerate up to about, I think it's 30 or 40% an increase of what you've got already. So I don't think my scale bar here is, might just make it into position. You also notice the horizontal and vertical offsets here. I'm going to have a play with these numbers, and I really wish they were on sliders. Maybe that's a future incorporation of Vectorworks. Normally what I'll do is first drop that to 0 and 0 and see how that looks from that point. Okay, it's off shot there, so I'm going to bring that back to -2000. Just missing a 0 there. And normally you'll just have to play a scaling and number game to fit these in. We can put decals on, which is something I'll show you for later on when we try and put a poster up. But I just wanted to show you, this is normally the method I've used in the past, mainly because I just find it easier to play with the numbers. And once you've got it in your head, I haven't done this for a while, but once you've got it in your head, it's quite easy to get it happening. See, I'm already quite close here. -50. I'm just going to play with these numbers, I'll be right back. So this is 2 minutes down the line here. I've just had to play with this. You can use the attribute and mapping tool up there, but I like to do it this way. I just feel more confident about it. So we'll just have a look at that. Overall it looks pretty good. I have got a white edge there, which I might have to eliminate purely because we're just mapping this onto the top. We might set the base color for this to be that light cream color there, which will eliminate that hopefully. Good. So that's our rug there. You can see that I just mapped that in with numbers. It doesn't look too bad, I think, and if you were to put that inside a set design or something like that, it wouldn't be too bad. That grey line there I could probably get rid of just by scaling that up another couple of points. It was included in the image that I just took, but I'd be pretty happy with that result if you showed it to me. Let's just focus on one more thing that I've got over here, which is currently hiding, but I've got a picture frame hiding there, and I'm going to try and put the Friends image on there as a decal. So let's have a go at that. And for this purpose I'm just going to jump inside this group here. I'm going to, have I got both those extrudes there? Okay, we'll start off with this one. This one I'm just actually going to colour purple because that's the colour that I've seen most of her walls. Where's a nice dark purple? It's not quite exact, but it'll do. Render that out for me, Vectorworks. You're hiding behind that wall. Excellent. Okay, so there we go. I'm just going to also choose from my layer options up here to grey others, which means hopefully they won't get rendered. They do in a transparent form. Alright, we will choose not to have any layers on behind us, just the active layer. And when you're inside a group, this is a handy thing to know. When you're inside a group like this, you can see that it's rendering the table because I turned off all the background layers there. It's the same as if I had gone up here and turned them off. There are group dependent things, but I'm not quite sure where I would access them. I'm also just going to try and grab inside here our interior picture box. So first thing I'm going to do is import the image that I'd like to put in here. So I'm going to go new resource. This time I'm going to do it as an image just to test this feature out. I'm trying to find this image that I've just found on the internet. Which is a lovely photo of the Friends guys there. Import as a JPEG. That seems pretty good. Now I'm going to try and show off decals. So to do this I need to find a part of this. Now you can apply decals to the top, the bottom or the sides of an object. Because of the way that I drew this object, it's actually the bottom that is currently facing us. It's just because I flipped it up after creating it, but that's okay. Under the textures panel you need to choose a base texture. Now I just want something really simple, so I'm actually just going to make a new texture in here really quickly, Renderworks texture, that just has a color attribute. And we'll make it a nice light cream, just in case we overshoot or miss something. We can do that. Actually, let's make it black. That's an even better idea. There we go, black. And we're just going to call this black temp. Excellent. And I'm going to apply that to the bottom. So drop this down here, find our black temp in here. There we go, and that should fill that in black. Excellent. Now I can click this Add Decal button. Do I want to change the texture mapping type? Now it's currently on perimeter, which is not editable with the mapping tool. That's the tool that I want to use to do this. So we've got to change the mapping type to be edited with that. Now we can reuse an existing image. That's why I've imported this image here. And I will choose the Friends background image here. Hit OK. We can choose the sizing for this. I'm not sure about the sizing. We're just going to have to go with it really. And we're going to hit OK. Now once we've got to this step, it's important to grab this tool here. It's the After Matting tool, and you'll notice in the first episode I just jumped over this because I said that we'd discuss it now. So clicking on this, and you can see it gives us this. It gives us this boundary here of our X, Y, and Z axes, and tells us basically to map this image. I'm going to, you can see my hand, a little hand turns to like it's like a hand pointing at a plasma screen almost. You just want to left click on the surface here, and the moment you've done that, it will realign that image to this surface, to the face that we're currently looking at. You'll also see, if I zoom in, there's our little tiny Friends image, so our scale was slightly out, but we can grab the corners and scale it upon this surface. So I'm going to grab this corner, hold down Shift so I maintain a scale, and I'm going to drag that right out there. I'm going to keep zooming out, and my computer is kind of like, what are you doing? Stop breaking me. But I'm going to grab this corner, and I'm going to keep scaling this up. You can see the scaling boundaries increasing. I'm going to grab the image, probably pop it up into this top left hand corner here, like so. Grab this bottom left hand corner, and because I purposely made this photo frame to fit the image size, I got the proportions correctly. I know that's going to fit in there nicely. I'm quite happy with that, so I'm going to click Exit Group. There's our image still maintained there, and if we zoom right back out here, there it is inside our venue or our area that we're working in. I've just got to turn the building shell back on again here through the layer options, show snap others, that's my normal default, and there it is. Look at our little photo just hanging in the back there. If I come over here, you can see it will change perspective, and even if I go down somewhere down here, it just maintains that perspective down there because it is mapped to that particular surface. So there you go. Does everyone feel like they understand textures now? I certainly have had a play and a little bit of an experience. The mapping tool is something that I very rarely use. As I said, I normally stick to the math, but using it just then, it was quite friendly and easy, so I'm very happy with how that's working out. And this is just a little thing that I've just realised now. You can see there's our carpet and flooring, and in the reflectivity that these windows have by default, you can actually see just barely through there our other reflectivity stuff. That's really handy. I didn't even know that happened. So I'm learning things all the time. Do I want to back this up? Yes, I do. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, just do a couple more little things here, and then I'm going to put an image prop in right at the end, and I think that'll wrap us up. We'll come in like an hour and a half of this episode. So I'll see you in a second. Well, that's about as far as I'm going to go with my house so far today, or I should say Monica's apartment. Just quickly to give you a teaser trailer for what might be coming up in our next series of classes when we get around to it. There are some very interesting features that we haven't yet looked at in Vectorworks. So make sure you do stay tuned. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully you've liked this. Make sure you check out the rest of the videos if you haven't as yet. My computer's struggling to keep up at the moment, but I might do a bit more work on this. I will release a short video on image props, which is probably going to follow this sometime in the future, just so we make sure we tick that box, and also section viewports, which is something we haven't discussed yet. So make sure you stay tuned for those, and as I said, there will be further series coming out after this, but hopefully you've enjoyed thus far. I'm James Russell, and stay tuned for more. Cheers.